All right, so today let's dive into ancient Indian cities. I know you're probably thinking about those iconic temples and those majestic forts, but have you ever stopped to think about what daily life was like for the people who lived in ancient Indian cities?
It's a great question. When we think about ancient India, we tend to focus on the grand temples and monasteries.
Yeah.
And we might assume that the lack of extensive ruins means they didn't build impressive cities.
Yeah, it's easy to just think that they didn't build big cities,
Mhm.
that maybe invading armies destroyed everything.
Exactly. And while destruction certainly played a role, there's another factor to consider, and that's the materials they used. They often built with perishable materials like wood and mud brick.
Okay, so like it wouldn't last as long as stone.
Precisely. It wouldn't stand the test of time quite like stone does. And then there's another fascinating element to this. It's the concept of repurposing. They often reuse stone from older structures in new constructions. So imagine entire cities being dismantled and their stones reborn as part of something else.
Wow. So it's not just about things not lasting, it's also that they were reusing the materials for new buildings.
Exactly. A continuous cycle of destruction and creation, which makes it a real challenge to piece together the full picture of what these cities looked like.
Okay, so that's where our deep dive comes in. We're going to reconstruct a hypothetical ancient Indian city. We'll call it Port, a bustling metropolis thriving between 500 BCE and 500 CE. We'll use archaeological findings, ancient texts, and even accounts from foreign travelers to bring this city to life.
Exactly. We'll uncover how they tackled everyday challenges like sanitation and water management. We'll explore their unique housing designs, and we'll delve into their forms of entertainment, healthcare systems, and governance structures.
So where do we start building Port? What's the foundation of our ancient city?
Well, before we get to the grandeur of palaces and the bustle of marketplaces, we need to address something fundamental to sanitation. You see, the ancient Indians were surprisingly ahead of their time when it came to hygiene and public health.
Really?
Yeah,
So when I think of ancient cities, sanitation isn't usually the first thing that comes to mind.
I understand. But what's remarkable is that they had sophisticated toilets connected to a citywide sewage system. We're not talking about rudimentary setups here. Their sewage and drainage systems were incredibly advanced with sloped lines for efficient flow stone slabs covering the channels to minimize odor, and even connections to rivers for waste removal.
Wow, that's impressive. So they had a pretty clear understanding of the link between sanitation and public health even back then.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about waste disposal. Personal hygiene was also important. We found evidence of public bathhouses, some even with separate sections for hot and cold water. These bathhouses were often connected to gymnasiums or located near social gathering spots like stepwells. Those incredible, intricately designed wells unique to ancient Indian architecture.
Oh, okay. So they weren't just functional structures, they were integrated into the social fabric of the city. What about garbage disposal? How did they manage that in a densely populated urban environment?
They had designated collection areas for garbage, which was then either composted, burned, or buried. And get this, there were even fines for those who didn't maintain cleanliness around their homes and workplaces.
Wow, so they were really serious about keeping things clean?
They were. It shows a clear commitment to public hygiene.
Okay, so we've got sanitation covered,
Right.
but a city also needs a reliable source of water. How did Port quench its thirst?
Absolutely. Water was vital, and Compassport had multiple systems in place to ensure a steady supply. Beyond those magnificent stepwells, which served as both water sources and social spaces, they had an intricate network of pipes, aqueducts, and canals to distribute water throughout the city.
So they didn't just rely on one source, they had a diversified approach.
Yeah.
What about water purity? Did they have methods to ensure the water was safe to drink?
They certainly did. Boiling water was a common practice, and they used natural filters like cloth and sand to remove impurities. So they were very aware of the importance of clean drinking water.
Makes sense. So we've got sanitation and water sorted out. Now, where did all these people of Port actually live?
To understand their housing, we can turn to ancient texts like the Manasara and Vastu Shastra. These texts are essentially architectural treatises laying out guidelines for city planning and housing design. Think of them as ancient blueprints for creating harmonious and functional living spaces.
Interesting. So they had a system for how they planned their cities and designed their homes.
Yes, and the most prevalent type of house was the courtyard house, a design that's still popular in India today. These houses were built around a central courtyard, which provided ventilation and light and served as a space for various domestic activities.
I can see how that design would be perfect for dealing with the heat. Was there any variation in housing styles, or were all courtyard houses pretty much the same?
Of course, there were variations. Designs were adapted to suit regional climates and the availability of materials. So, for instance, houses in drier areas might have been built with brick and had flat roofs, while those in coastal regions might have used wood and bamboo with sloping roofs to handle the monsoon rains.
Makes sense. Did everyone live in these courtyard houses, or were there different types of dwellings for people of different social standings?
Well, naturally, wealthier families would have had larger, more elaborate homes, perhaps, with multiple courtyards, fountains, and decorative elements. They might even have had separate quarters for servants or extended family. And we know from accounts of foreign travelers like Megasthenes, a Greek diplomat who visited India, that cities like Pataliputra had well-organized neighborhoods with distinct quarters for different social groups.
Oh, so they had a good understanding of urban planning and social organization. But a city is more than just homes and infrastructure. What did the people of Compassport do for fun? Did they have a vibrant entertainment scene?
They certainly did. The residents of Compassport knew how to have a good time. They had theaters, some large enough to hold thousands of spectators, where they enjoyed a variety of performances. And these theaters weren't just haphazardly constructed. They were designed according to principles outlined in ancient texts like the Nada Shastra, a treatise on dramaturgy and performance arts.
So they took their theater seriously. What kinds of performances might they have enjoyed?
While the sources don't go into specific details about the performances, we can imagine a range of entertainment, from dramas and comedies to dance music and acrobatics. It's fascinating to picture those ancient theaters filled with the sights and sounds of such vibrant performances.
I know, right? It makes you want to time travel.
Yeah.
Were there any other forms of entertainment besides theater?
Absolutely. Compassport had something for everyone. For those seeking a more adult form of entertainment, there were dedicated red light districts, bustling nightlife hubs with taverns, gambling houses, and elegant salons where courtesans entertained their guests.
So they had their share of nightlife. What about those who preferred something a bit more active? Were sports popular in Compassport?
Definitely. They were big fans of combat sports. Fighting pits for wrestling and boxing matches were common sights. And they even had chariot racetracks, similar to the Roman hippodromes, where crowds would cheer on their favorite charioteers.
I can only imagine the excitement of those races. Were there any other places where people gathered for recreation or social interaction?
The gymnasiums, while primarily for physical training, also served as important social hubs. Men would gather there not only to exercise, but also to discuss politics, philosophy, and the events of the day. It was a place for both physical and intellectual stimulation.
So they had spaces for both the body and the mind. Compassport is really starting to come to life.
It is, isn't it? And we've only just begun to explore its many facets.
This is truly fascinating stuff. I'm already hooked, and I know our listeners are too. But we've covered a lot of ground, and I think it's a good place to pause for now.
Agreed. We'll be back soon to delve deeper into the wonders of Compassport.
Don't go anywhere, listeners. We'll be right back with more intriguing insights into ancient Indian city life. And in the meantime, if you're enjoying our deep dive, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share this episode with your fellow history buffs. We'll be back soon with part 2 of our Compassport adventure.
Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those imaginations firing.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Compassport. Last time we started building our city. We talked about sanitation, water systems, housing, and even got into their entertainment scene. I'm ready for more.
Excellent. There's so much more to discover. Shall we step back into those grand palaces we touched on earlier? Remember, they weren't just centers of government, but also vibrant hubs of courtly life and expressions of power.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I'm picturing, all that polished wood, the gold, inlays, the precious stones. It all sounds so opulent.
It was a display of wealth and power, for sure. But these palaces were more than just showpieces. They were also centers of administration and justice.
Oh, right. We talked about the royal courts where judges would preside over legal matters.
Exactly. And there were administrative offices for managing everything from tax collection to trade regulation. These palaces were the nerve centers of the kingdom, where the king and his advisors would make decisions that affected the lives of everyone in Compassport.
So they were the real seats of power. But were they always buzzing with officials and serious business? I imagine there were moments of grandeur and festivity as well.
Absolutely. Palaces were also designed for elaborate banquets, royal weddings, and captivating performances by talented musicians and dancers. Imagine the halls filled with music, laughter, and the splendor of courtly rituals.
Wow, that's quite a contrast to the image of stern judges and tax collectors. Do you think ordinary people ever got to experience this palace life, or was it strictly for the elite?
There were likely occasions when the palace gates were open to the public, perhaps for religious festivals or special announcements. It's fascinating to imagine people from all walks of life getting a glimpse of the royal court and experiencing that grandeur firsthand.
Oh, for sure. It would have been an unforgettable experience. Okay, so we've got a good sense of the government and the palaces, but we haven't delved much into religion yet. Can you tell us about the religious landscape of Compassport? What role did faith play in the lives of its citizens?
Religion was a significant part of life in Compassport, as it was throughout ancient India. Between 500 BCE and 500 CE, a period of great religious and spiritual development, we see the construction of numerous temples, stupas, monasteries, and other religious structures.
So I'm picturing a city dotted with these grand religious complexes. Do they stand apart from the rest of the city, or were they integrated into daily life?
They were very much woven into the fabric of the city. These complexes weren't just places of worship, they were vibrant community centers where people gathered for religious ceremonies, festivals, educational pursuits, and social interaction.
So a bit like those town squares we talked about, but with a spiritual focus.
You could say that each religious complex had its own unique layout and architectural style. They often featured decorative towers, shrines, ritual halls, courtyards, and peaceful walking paths for contemplation. But there were also common elements like those intricate carvings depicting mythological stories and events.
It sounds like they put a lot of thought and artistry into their design.
Mhm.
Did the construction of these religious complexes have any impact on the city's economy?
Absolutely. Building a religious complex was a major undertaking, often requiring significant resources and manpower. Kings and wealthy merchants supported these projects as a way to earn religious merit and enhance their prestige.
Interesting. So it benefited both the city, which gained magnificent religious structures, and the patrons who gained social standing and spiritual rewards. What happened once these complexes were built? Did they become isolated enclaves?
Not at all. They actually became integral to the city's economy. They were major landholders attracting trade and providing employment for countless people. They also generated revenue through donations from devotees, further contributing to the city's economic vitality.
So they were spiritual, social, and economic centers all rolled into one. It's fascinating how they were so interwoven with every aspect of Compassport. Speaking of which, all this talk about bustling markets, grand palaces, and religious ceremonies is making me hungry. What did the people of Compassport eat?
An excellent question. The ancient Indians had a diverse and flavorful cuisine, and the people of Compassport were no exception. From historical records and archaeological findings, we know they had a vibrant food scene catering to a wide range of tastes and budgets.
Okay, you've got my attention. Paint me a picture of their culinary world. What kinds of foods did they enjoy, and where did they dine?
Imagine savoring aromatic curries, lentil stews, fragrant rice dishes, and flatbreads fresh from the tandoor oven. There would have been an abundance of fruits, vegetables, and spices to tantalize the taste buds. We know there were taverns and restaurants serving everything from local specialties to imported delicacies.
It's making my mouth water just thinking about it. Did they mostly cook at home, or did they have a culture of dining out?
We have evidence of communal dining areas and large kitchen spaces indicating that dining out was definitely a part of their culture. People from all walks of life gathered at these bustling eateries to share meals and socialize.
I love that idea. Did they have specific types of establishments, or was it all just one big food hall?
There were likely various types of eateries catering to different preferences. We can imagine casual spots with open fronts, low tables, cushions, and group seating arrangements that encouraged a communal dining experience.
Sounds cozy and inviting. Were there more formal options for special occasions?
We can also envision more upscale restaurants, perhaps offering private dining rooms for those seeking a more exclusive experience or hosting business meetings. And of course, those lively taverns we mentioned earlier would have been perfect for a casual drink and some entertainment.
So they had the full spectrum of dining experiences covered. Where were these eateries typically located? Did they cluster in specific areas?
You would find them near marketplaces, entertainment districts, and along those busy thoroughfares we discussed earlier. They were strategically placed to be easily accessible to both residents and visitors. Imagine grabbing a bite to eat while running errands or enjoying a night out on the town.
It's all starting to feel so real. All this talk about food makes me thirsty. What were the beverage options like in Compassport? Just water or something a bit more exciting?
Water was readily available, of course, from wells and public fountains, but they also enjoyed a variety of other beverages, including fruit juices, milk, and fermented drinks like palm wine and rice beer.
Sounds refreshing. Were there any regulations surrounding the production and consumption of these beverages, especially those with a bit of a kick?
Yes. Ancient Indian texts often mention regulations concerning the production, sale, and consumption of alcoholic beverages. These rules were likely in place to maintain order and prevent excessive indulgence.
Makes sense. Now, I know we've been focused on the city itself, but I'm curious about those who traveled to Compassport. Were there accommodations for visitors? And how did they find their way around this bustling metropolis?
Ancient cities needed to cater to travelers just as modern cities do today. Compassport had a clever solution. Rest houses strategically placed near the city gates, specifically designed to provide shelter for visitors. It didn't matter if they were merchants, pilgrims, or just passing through these rest houses offered a welcoming respite from the journey.
That's thoughtful. Were these rest houses basic shelters, or did they offer any amenities to make the travelers feel more comfortable?
They seem to have been more than just basic shelters. Typically, they featured dormitory-style sleeping arrangements, communal dining areas, and bathing facilities, ensuring a relatively comfortable stay. And like many of the other structures we've discussed, they often incorporated a central courtyard, providing a space for relaxation and socializing with fellow travelers.
So a home away from home for those on the road. Did they charge for these accommodations? And who was responsible for maintaining these rest houses?
The Chinese Buddhist monk Faxian, who traveled through India in the 5th century CE, described these rest houses as well-maintained. He noted they were typically funded by the state or private patrons, so they may have been free or offered at a nominal fee to cover basic expenses.
It's fascinating how they consider the needs of travelers in their city planning. Now, once these travelers arrived in Compassport, how did they find their way around?
Remember those well-developed roadways we talked about? The major streets were wide and well-maintained, likely with signage to help people navigate.
Right, so it wasn't just a maze of narrow alleyways. But with all those people and vehicles moving about, I imagine safety and security were major concerns.
You're absolutely right. Maintaining order within a bustling city like Compassport was crucial. In addition to their impressive city walls and fortifications, they had a system of law enforcement in place to ensure public safety and address any criminal activity.
So they had people dedicated to keeping the peace.
Yes, they had law enforcement officers who patrolled the city, investigated crimes, and worked to resolve disputes. But it wasn't just a top-down approach. It seems they often collaborated with local guilds and community leaders, taking a more community-oriented approach to law enforcement.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It would have been much more effective to involve the community in maintaining order. Now, with so much of the city built from wood, I imagine fire was a constant threat. What measures did they take to prevent and combat fires?
Fire safety was a top priority. As we discussed earlier, ancient Indian texts mention organized fire brigades. They were equipped with buckets of water, wet blankets, and sand to extinguish flames.
Right, and those strategically placed public wells would have been essential for a readily available water supply in case of a fire.
Exactly. They had a well-thought-out system for both fire prevention and rapid response. It really highlights their understanding of urban living and their commitment to creating a safe and prosperous environment for their citizens.
I'm truly impressed by how much they accomplished, but I have a feeling we're not done yet. There's still more to discover about Compassport, isn't there?
You're right. We've only just begun to scratch the surface. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll delve even deeper into the world of ancient Indian cities and uncover more fascinating insights.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We're wrapping up our exploration of Compassport, our hypothetical ancient Indian city. It's been an incredible journey so far.
It has. We've uncovered so much about their daily lives, their innovations, their challenges, and their triumphs.
From those surprisingly sophisticated toilets to the grand palaces and the bustling marketplaces, Compassport has really come to life. But before we say goodbye to our ancient city, there are a few more aspects I'd like to explore.
Of course. What's on your mind?
Well, we've talked about the infrastructure, the buildings, and the systems they had in place. But I'm curious about the people themselves. How did they move about in such a bustling city? I imagine the streets were pretty crowded.
Oh, you're right. Picture Compassport teeming with activity merchants transporting goods, families going about their day, children playing holy men, performing rituals, scholars engaged in lively debates. It would have been a vibrant mix of people from all walks of life.
I can only imagine. But how did they keep things organized with so much going on?
Well, remember those well-paved roads we discussed? They were designed with traffic flow in mind. Major streets were wide and well-maintained, probably with designated lanes for different types of vehicles. They likely had some form of traffic regulation, even if rudimentary, to keep things moving smoothly.
It's amazing to think they were already grappling with traffic management back then. Okay, so we've got our residents and visitors moving about efficiently. But a city also relies on a dedicated workforce to keep things running smoothly. We've talked about the military and those who maintain the city walls. But what about the people who provided essential services within the city itself?
Ah, yes. Beyond the military and the city's defenses, Compassport would have had a dedicated team responsible for maintaining order and providing vital services. These were the unsung heroes who kept the city functioning.
That's a great way to put it.
Right.
Who were these unsung heroes? What kinds of jobs did they do?
Well, first and foremost, there were those law enforcement officers we discussed. They patrolled the streets, investigated crimes, and worked closely with communities to ensure everyone felt safe and secure. They were the guardians of the city, so to speak.
Right, essential for maintaining peace and order. What other essential services were vital for Compassport?
Given the prevalence of wood as a building material, fire safety was paramount. Compassport, like other ancient Indian cities, had organized fire brigades equipped with buckets, blankets, and sand to extinguish flames.
Yes, we discussed that earlier, and it's really impressive how they recognized the importance of a dedicated force to combat fires.
Absolutely. They didn't rely on ad hoc responses. They had a system in place. And those strategically placed public wells we talked about weren't just for drinking water. They were vital for providing a ready supply of water in case of a fire.
It all comes back to their impressive city planning.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have law enforcement and fire protection. What other services were essential for keeping Compassport running smoothly?
Sanitation was crucial.
Yeah.
Remember those impressive sewage and drainage systems we discussed? They didn't maintain themselves. Compassport had a workforce dedicated to keeping those systems clean and functional.
It's a dirty job, but someone has to do it.
Or
What about those beautiful parks and gardens we talked about? They must have required a lot of upkeep to stay so pristine.
You're right. Compassport likely had a team of gardeners and laborers who worked tirelessly to maintain those green spaces, ensuring they remained peaceful and beautiful oases within the bustling city.
It's fascinating to think about all the people working behind the scenes to make Compassport the thriving metropolis we've imagined. It wasn't just about the grand structures and impressive systems, it was about the everyday people who kept everything running smoothly.
Exactly. It's a great reminder that even the most impressive civilizations are built on the hard work and dedication of ordinary people.
Well said. It's like a giant, intricate puzzle with each piece playing a vital role. We've explored so much from that nitty-gritty of sanitation to the splendor of those royal palaces, from the bustling markets to those tranquil parks.
Yeah.
I feel like I've truly stepped back in time. And although our hypothetical city is complete, our exploration of ancient India doesn't have to end here.
It really doesn't.
Yeah.
What we've done today is just a small glimpse into a vast and fascinating world waiting to be discovered.
So where do we go from here? What advice would you give to our listeners who want to delve deeper?
There are so many resources available. You can explore books and articles on ancient Indian history, visit museums with artifacts from that period, even plan a trip to see some of the incredible archaeological sites firsthand.
Those are great suggestions.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to leave our listeners with?
As you continue learning, remember that Compassport, while based on real historical and archaeological evidence, is a hypothetical creation. There's still so much we don't know about ancient Indian cities. That's part of what makes history so exciting.
It really is. It's an ongoing exploration full of mysteries waiting to be uncovered.
Exactly. Embrace your curiosity, keep asking questions, and who knows, maybe you'll be the one to make the next great discovery about ancient India.
I love that.
Yeah.
And listeners, if you enjoyed our deep dive into Compassport, be sure to subscribe to our channel and share this episode with your fellow history enthusiasts. We'll be back soon